Hey everybody, welcome to Nga. In most of the conlang showcases I've done for my Dog Days comics, I've mentioned that there are English words for each of these languages. In fact, it's in the video title most of the time for my showcases. Achkala, you mean Alkin. Pudbachkuj, you mean Permachikan. Shomite, you mean Shomatek. Nashalshin, Nashin, Prince, Prince, Pitham, Arodjun, Arodjun. So why did I do these things? Well, it all started when I was 7. Let's talk about this. When I was 7 years old, in the idyllic year of 2006, my parents had a yard built at my house. Like, we lived on an enormous hill, so in order to have a yard suitable for children, separate from the general Sonoran desert wildlife, a huge wall with 3 layers of retention had to be constructed and filled with this deep red clay from the Salt River quarries. And around the time that this yard was completed, my friends and I were huge fans of Bionicle. What a shock. And we all had dogs. So naturally, the thought was to make versions of our dogs into the equivalent of the Toa from the Bionicle series. So I wrote a story based on this juvenile lore called the Pup Heroes, which you may or may not be seeing a little bit more of sometime in the near future. It's not great. You can definitely see that it's just kind of like a Bionicle fan fiction. It's like a ripoff of the Toa Mari plotline. But that's where this all began. These pups, the dog people characters, each came from different areas of a mystical civilization, each one a corrupted version of the names of our dogs. This land was situated in a version of Earth where there was a landmass jutting out of Mexico just below Gulf of California that was meant to be like Arizona, but physically located down there. So when the construction of the yard was completed in the summer of 2006, there was a big old area of flat clay space and a hose. So after my parents' reluctant permission, we instantly went about recreating this land where our talking dog characters lived. And this became known as El Fwonk Casanosha, with the Fwonk part being named after my friend's Chewini Frankie. Rook City was named after my Shih Tzu poodle Roxy, and so on. So fast forward to 2014, and my parents destroyed the yard model while I was at a Boy Scout camp, and I was mentally scarred and left only to my imagination, and things just kind of escalated from there, from it just being this kind of casual yard model that my friends and I would mess around with, to being this whole world with conlangs and deep lore and comics and all that. And boom, look at that, I got a YouTube channel, and I could show stuff about it to you all now, so cool. Thanks, Mom. I hope she watches this. These civilizations and their histories have been developed for years and years and years, so when I needed to make the languages for them, I needed to make the languages evolve naturalistically from Proto-Cern-Cahelan, while still being able to get the names of the languages to sound somewhat similar to the original names my friends created as kids. Alkin, Permachikan, Nashin, Prince, etc. were created as concepts over a decade ago, and I'm only making the actual languages for them nowadays. And because I thought this process was interesting, even when I was designing Arodjun, in 2019 I did an honors credit project at university dedicated specifically to show how to anglicize Arodjun phonemes and how to Arodjunize English phonemes. It was a fun project, but I didn't really think much of it until recently when I was looking through some old files. Now I'm thinking these transliteration processes are actually pretty cool, and it's cool to see the many ways that you can link different sounds together to get them satisfy another language's sound palette. The sound palette being the phonology, right? Though for some reason in this context I think it fits the vibe to think of these phonemes through the idea of a palette instead, as if they are paints being used to craft an overall painting. So let's start with Arodjun, right? Here's Arodjun's phonology. Show on screen. Boom. Now we have to be able to convert this into English. So there's like the general American English phonology kind of I know there's lots of debate about little nitpicks and stuff, but yeah, you get the point. Taking those two concepts, here is the general approximation of phoneme conversions from the Arodjun palette to the English palette. Now, unfortunately, this should be covered in several asterisks, because allophonic variations in Arodjun can and do lead to different English results, and vice versa. So the name of the language, Arodjun, is a simple one. The native pronunciation is something along the lines of Arodjun, but that's an adjective prefix, that ja at the beginning, so let's just simplify it down to Arodjun. And these vowels can more or less be converted one for one from Arodjun into English, except that the first vowel is definitely more of an Arodjun. And then ch after a n turns into nothing in this official conversion that I created, leaving Arodjun, which is more or less how I would say it. I know that most English varieties don't tap their R's, but it's still well known enough of a version of ra from a European perspective, so I kind of arbitrarily rotate between saying Arodjun and Arodjun, and all I get are the occasional comments saying that the language sounds like auto-tune. So thanks to the YouTube automatic captions about 50% of the time for that one. But it can get much worse, so take a word like zakipfikal, which means flannel crab, which is like a giant crab that they keep as pets in the Flannel Peninsula, in the lore. So in this situation, it's not as easy. You gotta take into account syllable stress and a bunch of other stuff. So in the IPA, it looks like this phonemically. The root word is zakipfi, and the sa and za at the onset of an unstressed syllable and before a plosive cause the unstressed vowel nucleus to be elided and the fricative to become the new onset to the following syllable. Now, as we make our way towards the English version, we have something like zakipfi. You can't have a voiced fricative adjacent to a voiceless plosive in a syllable's onset in English, so the za becomes an English sa. Now it's skipfi. Now, both of the vowels in Arodjun are E, and you can keep the unstressed vowel in skipfi as an E. The stressed vowel can either be kept as E in English, or it can be made into the lax I because of the p cluster that follows it, or just to match the word in English, skip. So finally, the English conversion of zakipfikal is skipfi, or skipfi. And the origin behind that is I had a pet hermit crab named Skippy, who I would occasionally let roam outside in the physical model of Elfwonk. Skippy was the flannel crab, right? Named after a fictional pet crab that Queen Roxy, the character, had in a story I wrote when I was 9. It's all connected. Both the Arodjun and zakipfikal examples had two possible English outcomes, and technically many more depending on the English variety. Keep in mind that this is pretty much the same thing that happens in real-world languages, both with true loanwords and with localizations, when words are converted from one phonology to another for the sake of convenience. And I'd love to talk more about my Anglicization standards for Arodjun words, as there's a lot to talk about, enough that I wrote a whole extra credit linguistics paper about it. But we need to go deeper, because sometimes the names I use for languages and locations are Anglicizations of Arodjunizations. I explained one example of this in the Alkin Akala video, which if you haven't watched it, please do. I worked really hard on that one. Akala is the endonym for the language in that video. So how did I get from Akala to Alkin? Well, the first time the speakers of Middle Arodjun had worthwhile contact with Junalk speakers. Junalk is another Anglicization. I could go on forever with these. The land that they lived in was called Hochkalem, and Hochkalem entered Middle Arodjun as Alkalem, which shifted with phonological shifts as Arodjun developed over time into Alkalam. The word final ma hypercorrected into a n to match with the now ubiquitous un suffix for cities and other permanently inhabited static locations in Arodjun, yielding Alkalan, and its derived demonym nk is there, yielding the demonym Aukawang. Leading up to early modern Arodjun, lots of contractions occurred, especially the elision of u when it was followed by a syllable onset wa. Finally, the u and the ŋ suffix becoming more ubiquitous and taking over the vowels of the final syllable, giving the final result of jaukunk, or aukunk if you don't include that adjective prefix. So the English version existed before I created Arodjun, so my way of bending over backwards to get this to fit was this. The Anglicization takes the state of the word in late middle Arodjun, or something along the lines of Aukawan, uses the an ending of the word to match English's demonym suffix and or ian, whatever, and proceeded to metastasize and delabialize the wa that once began the syllable. And all that comes together to create the English word alkin. So through brutal reverse engineering, 2 layers of localization, that's how you get from Akala to alkin. So why do I do this? Mostly just to pay respects to my childhood self, and to make locations in my stories easier for my primarily non-Arodjun speaking audience to read. The Dog Days world has changed drastically from the Pup Heroes world of 2006, but some of the place names were pretty memorable and iconic in my humble opinion. Fwan, Arodjanza, Ruxalusha, Caesarun, Soyarun. So, I thought those were pretty cool. So I made them have logical, or at least semi-logical connections to Arodjun phonology and grammar, bending logic wherever I needed in order to create some interesting origins and interesting end results. Plus, I can't expect my whole audience to speak Arodjun or try to memorize Arodjun phonology. I know some people don't like that particular reasoning, and I understand that sentiment. In my situation, however, the English versions already existed before, and the entire comic on nga.org/comic can be switched between the original Arodjun text and its English translation just by hitting a button, so you can get both names either way. I'd say that's a good enough justification to have English versions of places and demonyms exist, at least in my personal situation. And the whole comic can be an Arodjun learning experience, so why create an unnecessary challenge in the English version when it's not entirely necessary, right? If I didn't have the pre-existing English version of this world from my childhood, perhaps I would have made the primary conlang have a more palatable phonology to English speakers or something. But I didn't really need to worry about that in my case, so lucky me, I guess. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. Quicker video than I've done in a long time, but there's a lot of stuff in the works, so bear with me here. Thanks for all the ngatrons for supporting my wacky adventures. Doing that fun live stream where we talked about the Cursed Conlang Circus 3's methodologies. It's fun. It's a good time. Go become a ngatron if you're interested. And yeah, remember to go read my comic over at nga.org/comic. I haven't updated the site in a little bit, but I have a bunch of pages that I'm pretty much ready to drop on that site sometime very, very soon. So go ahead, read it, learn some Arodjun if you want, and look at those place localizations wherever they appear, because they're in there. So for now, nga is